Should I click here?
Yes. Okay, we are now live.
Let's start?
Yes.
Yes, we start. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I am Alejandro Esteves. I am the director of the CDO, Center for the Study of the State and Public Organizations from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Let me introduce our two guest speakers of today. The main speaker is Pierre, and our commentarist is Patricia Becker. Let's talk about the title of the webinar. The webinar is named The Next Pandemic Governance Challenges in Addressing Antimicrobial Resistance. So let me introduce Pierre. Pierre is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. He has previously held professorships at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland, and the Melbourne School of Government in Melbourne, Australia. He has written or edited 40 books and more than 80 journal articles, mainly on governance, public administration, urban politics, and public management. His recent publications include Democratic Backsliding and Public Administration from Cambridge University Press, 2022, and the last book with Guy Peters, Governance, Politics, and the State, Belgrave, 2020. And for the comments, we have Patricia Becker. Patricia Becker is a renowned political scientist or strategical studies, Brazilian. Actually, she's the public management director at Fundação Dom Cabral in Brazil. He has a master in strategy, governance, and interorganizational relations. He has more than 10 years of experience leading development projects for Brazilian public organizations. So, Jon, let's start with your speech.
Thank you.
Your presentation.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Let's see if I can get, excuse me, if I can get this presentation going. I chose to call the, let's see, does this work? If I want to move on here. I don't think it's moving. I can't get on to the next slide.
You have to click on the screen.
On the screen?
Yes.
There we go. Yes, good. Thank you.
No, don't worry.
I still have a bit of a sort of post PowerPoint trauma, if you like. I was going to give a talk in the finance ministry in Stockholm a few years ago, and I had put together everything that I wanted to say on a 5 or 6 slides. So everything was there, but it looked kind of boring. So I asked my teenage daughter, who happened to be home that day, I said, you use this? And she said, yes, I use it all the time. So I said, okay, if I give you these slides on a USB memory, can you see if you can just sort of, spice it up? Can you make it come alive more? And she looked at me and said, yes, I can do that, she said. And she walked away and she came back half an hour later with the USB drive. And my epic mistake here was that I didn't check the slides before I went off to the meeting. So the next morning I got on a plane, I flew to Stockholm, I went to the finance ministry, I put in the USB plug, I had a crowd of 50 or 60 people, and I began to realize what she had done with the presentation when my name came up on the first slide, and there was the sort of Star Wars theme of Darth Vader, coming out through the loudspeakers. And I sort of ignored that. I went on to the second slide, and the points were coming in from all different angles, and they were sort of exploding right on the top of the screen, and there were different colors of orange and purple sort of pulsating all over the screen. So it just went on like that, and it got worse and worse and worse. And eventually I had to say that, well, I'm sure you realize that this is not my work. This is my teenage daughter who has been playing with the files. And they said, yeah, we understand that. And so I said, I will kill her when I get home. And they said, of course you do. You know, that's perfectly normal. So every time I pull up a PowerPoint presentation, I always get these flashbacks. Anyhow, what I want to do is to talk about the so-called next pandemic, which is actually already happening. A lot of it just has to do with how we choose to define pandemic. Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, is a public health problem that kills more than 1 million people worldwide every year. Very few people talk about it. Very few people even know about it. But this is something that is a problem which is already here and which will, unless we do something serious about it, it will just grow worse and worse. So what I want to do is, first of all, to talk a bit about the nature of AMR as a policy issue, and then walk you briefly through exactly what AMR is all about and what the best public health strategy to address this problem might be. And from there on, I'm then going to talk about an ongoing research project, and I'm going to give you some of the highlights that are coming out of that. And this is something that me and my research team have been working on now for 3 years. So if you look at some of the basic features of AMR, you will see that there are 3 things that sort of stand out. One is that the political and electoral salience of AMR is extremely low. So voters rarely talk about AMR. The media rarely talks about AMR. And as a result, political leaders too are very quiet on AMR. I think the reason for that, from the political point of view, is that it is a long-term problem. If we start addressing AMR today, there will not be a benefit for the government in the next election. So the payoff is far into the future. And that is, I think, a major disincentive for the political leadership to actually engage this issue. And if the voters don't seem to care very much about AMR, then the political leadership will also be quite uninterested in it. Secondly, if you look in the public health sector in most countries of the world, you will find that there's a high degree of institutional autonomy on the executive side. So you will either have a line agency, an independent agency that has a lot of discretion in relationship to the political level, or you will have a smaller institute of public health, which is more, like a public think tank almost, where you find all the experts sitting. And then you will have a huge ministry that will both sort of formulate the policy and also implement those policies. So there's good news and there's bad news here. The autonomy is an outcome of the lack of political interest in AMR. But from the experts' point of view, it's not entirely bad news, because this opens up a space for them where they can set their own agenda, they can take their own initiatives, they can get to work, because they know that there will not be very much interference from the political level. And third, it's a rather complex issue. And the really interesting thing here is that the science of AMR is not that challenging. What is more challenging is to come up with ideas about how to address AMR, and also, perhaps more importantly, how to organize public policy, public interventions of various kinds to reduce the prevalence of AMR. So what happens then? So basically, what we have here is a situation where where the cat is away and the mice come out to play. There's a lot of administrative autonomy here on an issue which is a fairly complex issue, and where politicians don't really seem to care. So this opens up what I've called in some way a sort of an administrative action space. There's a field of discretion here. And this is something where experts, if they choose, they don't have to sort of occupy that space. But if they choose to do that, and most of the experts that I've interviewed are extremely keen to use that discretion for professional purposes. We'll be coming back to that because that's a key point. There is a group of scholars called Shen and Shou, and I've really come to like how they go about when they describe administrative autonomy. They make a distinction between, on the one hand, what they call latitude of action, and on the other hand, they talk about a latitude of objectives. And a latitude of action means that the public servant doesn't question the overall goals of what the institution is supposed to be working towards. They accept those goals, they think those goals are good, but they use their autonomy to pursue those goals through other channels than they usually do. The other alternative, latitude of objectives, means that public servants can in fact also set up and define their own objectives. And this is a way to think of administrative discretion, which is closer to, say, the rational choice, the public choice idea, where a public servant, if you're familiar with the working, shirking, and sabotage literature, that if you give a public servant too much freedom, they will start doing things that they're not supposed to do. So it's a way of looking at public service and public servants as sort of neglecting the whole professional dimension of what public service is all about, and just applying an economist's model or theory on what the public service does. And what we have found in our work is that the autonomy that the experts have in this field is used much more for a latitude of action than a latitude of objectives. So they really are entrepreneurs. These senior AMR, these senior public health experts, they really are entrepreneurs. They have a lot of expertise. They have a passion for what they're doing, truly an amazing passion for what they're doing. They team up with each other. They know each other on a sort of a first name basis. When I interviewed someone in the Czech Republic, they would say that, well, have you spoken to so-and-so in Poland? I said, yes, I talked to her last week. Yeah, she's my mentor. She said, we know each other quite well. So this is a very tight network of senior public servants working on the same or extremely similar issues. And this comes out very clearly across the EU. We see it in Italy, Poland, Portugal, Latvia, the Czech Republic, in Sweden, and many other countries. It's a truly fascinating, as some people call it, epistemic community that we see here. A very tight, cohesive, effective network of experts. Now, we'll be coming back to all this. I just wanted to get your sort of public administration juices flowing here a bit. So let me now dig into more what the AMR problem is all about. Antimicrobial resistance is the result of us using too much antibiotics. We use it when we don't have to use it. We use it longer than we have to use it. We use it for purposes that are doubtful at best. We use it on human beings, and we use it on livestock in farms. We use it on chicken and pigs and beef to speed up the growth process so that we will produce food on a faster level, and to allow farmers to have bigger farms, to have so-called industrial farms of beef or chicken, where you can stack in any number of chickens. You fill them up with antibiotics, and that means that they will basically never get sick. They are perfectly healthy when they get it, but they get it preemptively. So what happens is that the more antibiotics you use, the more likely it is that bacteria will learn to be resistant to antibiotics. And this is when things really start getting problematic, because that means that if a patient is admitted to a hospital and is suffering from a bad case of, say, pneumonia, the doctors would typically prescribe, okay, we're going to put you on antibiotics. And then they realized that, hang on a minute, the antibiotics are not working here. And then they try an even stronger antibiotic and say, no, that's not working either. And eventually the patient will die from pneumonia, from a disease which is a very sort of routine matter for any medical doctor or even any medical hospital. It also means that we cannot perform routine surgery like hip replacement or knee joint replacement, stuff like that, where you have to use antibiotics. So more than 1 million people in 2019, 1.3 million deaths were attributable to AMR. So the next pandemic, to sum up, is here. And we're not talking very much about it. I talked about this. We use it as a medicine. We use it also in animal food production, as I said. Okay. We should also, just one final point here is to realize that multi-resistant bacteria are spread very, very easily and very, very quickly. The world is an integrated place, and these bacteria are great at travel. They will travel in human bodies. They will travel in, when we import food or food items from other countries, they are likely to be infected with multi-resistant bacteria. Now, who is this bugger here? Well, this is a mammoth. This is a mammoth, and the picture is taken with, I can see, a very low resolution camera, but the mammoth has been dead for several thousand years, so I don't think the mammoth cares very much about the quality of the picture. Why are we looking at a mammoth, I hear you ask? Well, these animals roamed the earth several thousand years ago. They are currently being found and excavated in the Siberian taiga in sort of northern Russia. When the ice is melting, every now and then there's a skeleton of a mammoth cropping up. And the amazing thing is that when they study those dead animals, what they find is that they actually carry multi-resistant bacteria. So how is that possible? How can these animals that lived many thousand years before we had antibiotics, how can they have loads and loads of multi-resistant bacteria? Well, the answer is quite simply that antimicrobial resistance is an evolutionary bacterial response. And we had antibiotics long before Dr. Fleming sort of discovered antibiotics in the 1940s. It's the same thing as saying that Christopher Columbus discovered America, as if America didn't exist before Columbus went there. Ian Fleming stumbled across antibiotics, and he saw that it had a tremendous potential as a medicine for bacterial diseases. But antibiotics has always been free in nature, as have the bacteria. And this battle between bugs and drugs, as some people call it, the battle between bugs and drugs has been going on for as long as we have had this planet here. So this is what was going on inside these mammoths. There were bacteria, there were antibiotics, and the bacteria became resistant to the antibiotic. So what this means is that if we think that we can sort of eradicate antimicrobial resistance, that is a great theme for the next Mission Impossible movie, because you can't do that. This is, we can't, as this British AMR expert that I interviewed said, we can't fight evolution. What we can do is use antibiotics in a more smarter way than we're currently doing. That's our only chance to be more clever, to apply what is called antibiotic stewardship, a more professional and thought through way of using antibiotics and knowing when to use it and when not to use it. So this picture here, I found this picture online. This is from a shop in Uganda. And every jar and every can and every bottle you see on the shelves here is antibiotics. So the people in Uganda, they don't need to go and see a medical doctor and get a prescription, or they don't need to go to a veterinarian and say that, can you give me some antibiotics that I can use on my chickens or my pigs, for instance. They just walk into the shop, they take whatever they want from the shelves, and they walk out and they use it. So there's zero control here. This is not just a third world phenomenon. I should add, my grad student was a visiting PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh, together with our friend Guy Peters, a couple of months, and he came down with an infection, and he just walked across the street into this store, I mean a food store basically, and they had shelves and shelves of antibiotics. He could just pick himself and choose what he wanted. He did not have to go to see a doctor to get a prescription for that. So the best way to reduce antimicrobial resistance is to reduce the use of antibiotics. This will require advanced international sort of coordinated action. If one country excels in reducing and antibiotics consumption, that won't help, because these bugs will just travel. They don't sort of recognize national borders. They will just pop up in another country. So everyone has to do it, and everyone has to chip in, which makes it, from a social science point of view, which makes it a really fascinating collective action problem. So there's the imminent risk here that if some countries commit themselves intensively to reducing the use of antibiotics in their country, that might lead political leaders in neighboring countries to think that, well, if they're doing such a great job, maybe we don't have to do so much. So you get the typical sort of free riding problem here. In addition to sort of reducing the use of antibiotics, we should also work on improving antibiotic stewardship. And antibiotic stewardship is the idea that we need to talk to professionals in the medical sector, to talk to doctors at the clinical level, and just tell them that here's a set of rules for you to decide whether or not you should give a patient antibiotics, and then follow those rules. And I think we should be well underway to reducing AMR. Hospital hygiene sounds extremely boring, but this has become one of the main frontiers in the battle against AMR. So I have a friend who works for the Swedish Public Health Agency, and she told me some time ago that look, I have a doctorate in epidemiology, and I have another doctorate in microbiology. And what am I doing? I am traveling the country, talking to people who work in hospitals, and I tell them that they need to wash their hands out more often. That's not what I signed up for. This is not why I got 2 doctorates, because this, but she said, the thing is that hospitals are today one of the main battlefields. So there's a number of really vicious multi-resistant bacteria that can actually only be found in hospitals. So people going into hospitals should be aware that there's a fair chance that they will walk away with bacteria that they did not have when they sort of went into hospital. So hospital hygiene has become an absolute key issue. There's also the idea that we need to think in what is called a One Health perspective. And that means that we should not just look at antibiotics as they are used on humans. We should also bring in the veterinarian sector, and we should bring in the environmental sector. So those 3 areas, humans, animals, and the environment, are where we say that what we need is a sort of consolidated approach, a joint strategy that addresses antimicrobial and the occurrence of multi-resistant bacteria in all these 3 fields. So to sum this up, the science here, the medical science, is not the problem. The science is actually quite straightforward. The real challenge is a governance challenge. So if you compare AMR to, say, climate change, you see, I mean, there are so many similarities here. The science is not, this is not rocket science. Neither is climate change. We know exactly what we need to do to reduce global warming, or to arrest global warming at its current level. We know exactly what to do. The challenge is to get people and countries and governments and businesses to subscribe to that idea. That's the challenge. Okay. I want to talk about collective action now. Why is collective action necessary? Well, because it is a global problem. Everyone has to chip in. We can tell very easily which countries that are good at this and which countries that are not so good. I will not give any names, but there is a vast difference between different countries, and that difference does not necessarily correlate with economic development. So there are countries that are really well off, that are in the top 5, top 6 globally in terms of annual economic growth, who are not doing a great job to address these issues. And there are countries that are quite poor, that are much less affluent, that are actually doing heroic measures to reduce AMR. So it does not necessarily correlate with the level of prosperity of those countries. The question of whether collective action requires formal authority, this is, for those of you who have sort of waded through the literature, you know that this is one of the most debated issues. Do you have to have some upper level authority that will tell actors what to do to get their act together, literally speaking? Or is collective action something that can be an outcome of a group of actors agreeing on what we call a regime, as Eleanor Ostrom would say that. They all agree on a regime where no one gets exactly everything they want, but they're all pretty good off, and the solution is sustainable. So this is a really, really tricky question. In AMR, this plays out almost like a big social full-scale experiment, because if we're looking at human public health and the veterinarian sector, we can see that in the human health sector, the EU has very little formal authority. The EU, as you may have noticed, is a big mysterious saga in itself. And there's this constant struggle between the issues that should be controlled by the member states and the issues that should be more federal. And public health is seen as part of social policy, and the EU has very little formal authority on that field. On the veterinarian side, it is coded as part of agricultural policy, which is, of course, where the EU shines. This is one of the biggest fields of the EU. So we have one sector where there is no formal authority, human public health, and another sector which is dealing with the same problem, but where there's a lot of formal authority with the EU. So we can compare these two sectors and see how is the collective action coordinated in the human public health sector versus in the veterinarian sector. Another issue which also comes up when you start looking empirically at this collective action is that you recognize that there's a tremendous diversity here among the actors. If you read the big classics in collective actions theory, you will see that they rarely talk about the problem of heterogeneity among the actors. But this is something which comes out and which plays an absolutely decisive role for whether collective action will be successful or if it will fail. So, and this should look familiar to you, Patricia, I guess, to look at hierarchies, look at networks, stakeholder arrangements, and so on and so forth. And all of these different strategies to organize collective action can be seen in the EU context. So I'm going to walk you quickly what we're doing in this study. It's a mixed methods approach where we started to use a survey, which we sent out to I think some 170 or so AMR experts across the EU. Then we mapped the institutional context, and then here's the survey, and then we conducted a series of interviews with senior AMR experts in all the EU member states, plus the UK, Norway, the WHO, and the EU Commission. So we've done an awful lot of interviews. And I can confess that when we launched this project, I saw myself sort of jetting around Europe, jumping from one national capital to the other to do these interviews, and having a really great time until, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic hit us all. And so every single interview was actually done on Zoom. I didn't get a single trip of all those trips that I had hoped that I would be able to. Not a single one. They were all done on Zoom. We talked about the diversity. I will not talk very much about that. How do you deal with the diversity? If you know that there are countries that are doing extremely well, and there are countries that are doing less well, what do you do? Well, from the EU's point of view, it's a bit of a problem, because if they put the bar, so to speak, too high, then the underperforming countries will just say, sorry, we can't, there's no way we can reach this target. And if you put it too low, the high performing countries will say that, oh, we're already doing this. I mean, this is not a challenge at all. So the EU are using a lot of different measures. This is the October sun actually coming right in my face here. Hang on 1 minute. Let's see if I can move over here. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to sit over here so that it works. One idea or one strategy to overcome the diversity for the EU is to basically pair up the high-performing country with the low-performing country. So that the Netherlands, for instance, they have a close cooperation with the Czech Republic. Sweden has a close relationship with Latvia, and so on and so forth. And they use these bilateral ideas so that the high-performing country, the country that is doing really well, can explain to the country that is more struggling, and here's what you should do. Here's the kind of data you need. Here's the surveillance you need to do. Here's how we did it, and maybe you can do it too. That, I think, has turned out to work quite well. There's also a system to have a sort of an international peer review system where AMR experts visit each other's countries and get a report and an update on what they're doing and the problems that they're facing. They give advice on how they can improve their AMR work and so on. I will look very quickly at these findings, and I will, let's see. I will go here, I think. The findings that we have, I'll be really brief about that, is the existence of these powerful epistemic communities and networks, and how they are used to disseminate knowledge among the countries, and where the experts feel that, well, if the national politicians aren't really very interested in what we're doing, we know that we have colleagues in other countries that are really interested in what we're doing. So we can talk to them and we can be inspired by them. We can exchange ideas with them and so on. Free riding is often described in the literature as the biggest problem associated with collective action. I don't think it is, frankly. I don't think free riding is a problem at all here. I think the biggest problem is to get antimicrobial resistance on the agenda and to get politicians more involved than they are. That's the number one problem. I don't think that there's a single country where experts are just sitting back in their chairs thinking that, oh yeah, I don't need to do anything really here because all the other countries are spending so much money on and staff and everything on this, so I can be extremely relaxed about this. That's not happening at all. The political indifference is the biggest problem. That's the number one problem. And experts they went on and on and on when I interviewed them, saying that we do not get any attention. The only way they can get attention, which actually experts in a few countries confessed to me, is that we can get attention from our politicians if I call someone I know in the European Commission and say that you need to talk to my Minister of Health and tell him to do this. And he said, yes, I'll do that. And then she said, 2 days later, I had the minister in my office saying that I just had a call from the European Commission and we need to prepare something for them. So she got her political leader's attention by calling someone she knew in the European Commission, and he would then call the Minister of Health. So they're not stupid, these experts. They know exactly how to sort of work their ministers. The pharmaceutical industry, some look to them as the big savior here. That is not going to happen. They have very few incentives to develop new antibiotics, which medical doctors are constantly told not to use. So the antibiotic industry will say, why should we do that? You're asking us to invest millions of dollars in developing new antibiotics, which you also tell your medical doctors that they must not prescribe these antibiotics. There is no rationale, there's no reason for the pharma industry to engage in this because the money isn't there. You keep telling our clients that they shouldn't use these medicines. How do you overcome that obstacle? There are different ideas out there. In some countries, national governments have just sort of paid the pharma industry, saying that we know it's not going to sell very much, but we do need it. So here's some money to help support your research. And then perhaps finally, this is something which has come up in several interviews. Maybe we need to sort of backtrack here. We use antibiotics when people come into hospital or they go to see a doctor because they have an infection. Now, what if we could reduce the occurrence of infections? That would reduce the need to use antibiotics. So as one of the experts said, we need to look at the cause of the causes here. We need to go back one step and say that if people, for instance, can have more decent housing and so on and so forth, maybe we would have fewer infections. I'll stop there. And I'm happy to take your comments and questions. You are muted, Alejandro.
Yes. Thank you, John. So, Patricia, you can go ahead with your comments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Pierre. It was really interesting explanation. Hi, everyone who is watching us here from YouTube and here with us. We're joking just before the lecture that when Alejandro invited me, and I was like, should I be part of it? What do I know about antimicrobial? And was really interesting going through Professor Pierre's presentation. And this is actually, he made a joke during the presentation saying, this is something I'm used to that because it's something that I researched during my master. And I'm absolutely intrigued about this governance problem when you have, not problem, but challenge when we have to address a complex problem, a complex issue that it's not only inside, within an organization, within a country, but with multiple stakeholders, multiple organizations. They share a common goal, a common objective, but you have to deal with all this orchestration, and that's not simple, as Professor Pierre just showed us here. It's a very, very tricky. It can bring up a lot of benefits for all the society, but it's actually a really challenge. And it's notable, as we saw the lecture, that we are dealing with a complexity challenge, a complexity problem. It deals with human, animals, it deals with private sector, public sector, different stakeholders, different levels of organizations. And it's also, like Professor Pierre said, a long-term issue, which means that the governments, the governance that are now in their position, they're probably not collect the bonus of a policy regarding that. And it's also not something that the citizens are really feeling in their regular day. It's something that maybe their grandsons or great-great-sons are gonna deal with this problem. So even though we have a more active society nowadays, interested in public issues, it's not something that they feel in their everyday activities. So it's hard to engage and bring them along to this debate or this action as well. It's a biologic and scientific challenge, as the professor explained, but like he said, the governance of it itself, it's a huge challenge to be addressed. as we are talking about multiple and independent parties that you have to bring along to solve this problem. Like I said, those type of networks and interorganizational relations, it's a field of research that brings me and the academy nowadays a lot of attention in something that we are dealing every day as we have a more globalized world, as we have more complex problems, and as the problems get more complex, we are not be able to address them only within one organization, only within the country. We just tested that during COVID pandemic. We have to get together and think about actions that you do commonly in different countries, so we can deal with this challenge. So I think when we talk about the state reforms and how it's moving to a governance agenda, and this is because we are facing more complex problems, like this example that Professor Pierre brought to us. And the complexity about that is that we don't have a hierarchy to tell you do this, you do that. Now we go through this direction or through that direction. No, the governments, the private sector, the industry, the shops are independent. The doctors, they can do. So we have to orchestrate and influence the parties of it, the stakeholders, so we can go through a path that it's common to everyone, not in everything, because you can never set objectives and goals that are all the same. Professor Pierre also told about the measurement challenge as well. How can you measure, because they are different, they are in different levels, so you have to treat them different, but you have to find something that is in common and to lead them towards this objective. There was another interesting discussion regarding authority, and that's something very common in the literature as well, how, because we are talking about a network, we're not talking about hierarchy, but even though there isn't an authority, there are a lot of specialists and researchers that say that the importance of a leadership. And you have to have someone to lead this process, because maybe to set the goals, this leadership is different from a leadership that you do when you are within an organization as well. It requires different competences, it requires different sort of acts. So it's another tricky and challenging thing about this problem. I think to start with, maybe there's some comments that I would like to bring, but we can maybe open for the chat and talk a little bit more about that. I saw that we already have some questions here. So should I go through Marcela's questions to start with? And she's complimenting you about the webinar, Professor Pierre, and she asked, how can you tell us, if you can tell us, in which population groups there is a greater possibility of suffering from IMR?
Oh, I don't really think that this is immediately age-related. And here I am on a somewhat shaky ground, but I think that it is not, I mean, it is not the case, for instance, that more senior people are more susceptible to multi-resistant bacteria than, say, small children. The key point is at what phase of your life that you are consuming antibiotics. And so I guess statistically speaking, the older you get, the more likely it is that you will be consuming more antibiotics, and that may or may not trigger the development of new multi-resistant bacteria. So it's not immediately age-related. It is more sort of related to well, to the health of the individual. So there are basically newborn babies that have been diagnosed with multi-resistant bacteria. So it's yeah, I'll stop there.
There is also a question from Giselle. I don't know if I pronounce your name right, so I'm sorry if I did not. She also compliments you, Professor Pierre, and ask you if you think that a polycentric approach of governance might apply to addressing this problem.
Thank you, Giselle. Yeah, yes, I think this is a way to think about the governance of the AMR work, which is getting a lot of attention. So to think that the landscape here, so to speak, is almost by definition polycentric. As you pointed out, Patricia, there's a wide variety of different actors and different types of actors on the stage here. And so it's the whole idea that there should be a firm hierarchy in this very sort of heterogeneous group is not likely to be very effective. I think the real problem here is that on the one hand, if we're thinking, excuse me, if we're thinking about hierarchies, we have elected officials who are to tell the experts what the experts should do. But that becomes really bizarre because the experts know what needs to be done and the politicians do not know that. So if we insist that the political leadership should be in charge, so to speak, their advice or their orders to their experts will be, I guess the polite word will be, well, they will be inefficient. So the experts are the ones who know exactly what needs to be done. And so the best relationship here is where the experts have the attention of the politicians and say that here's what we need to do and here's what you need to tell me to do, so to speak. You need to authorize what I'm doing because I know what needs to be done. You don't know that, but I know that. So please authorize me, please provide me with the financial resources that I need to do this, because this is what we need to do. You don't understand that, but I understand that. So just go ahead, agree with my plans. And some politicians in some countries realize this. And they think exactly like that. But politicians in many other countries, they will just tell their public health expert to say, go away. You know, this is not an issue that I need to worry about, or I do not wish to worry about. Hence the polycentric governance here, where you think beyond the hierarchy, where you say that, well, we have a vastly heterogeneous cast of actors here. And the challenge is to get those actors to arrive on a model of coordination which actually will work. So thank you, Giselle. That's a good question.
She has another one for you as well, about this problem, Professor Pierre, how to problematize more this problem, because in some countries it seems that it has not achieved to be in the agenda. There is something that you mentioned as well. It's not in the political agenda. It's not in the priority. So how can you influence and make this a priority?
That is the $64 million question. I think. How do we get politicians to really commit themselves to this? I interviewed a senior official at the World Health Organization. And he made the interesting point, he said that, you know, we're all talking about the need to get AMR on the agenda. And he said, my point here is that I believe that AMR is on the agenda, but although it is on the agenda, we're not doing very much. So that's an even worse position, that if you put politicians in a room, they will all subscribe to the idea that, yes, we need to do something about AMR, and then nothing happens. So that's even worse in a way.
Alejandro also asked the question, and I was thinking about that as well, Alejandro. If it's correct to say that finally the IMR problem could be solved politically, and that we would need great international consensus, and that for this we need a great efficiency in the organizations such as United Nations. I thought about a role concerning World Health Organization as well. How can we address with these multinational organizations?
Well, they are actually doing a lot of work. There was one thing that perhaps excuse me, that I should have mentioned along with the previous question is how do you get how do you get the AMR issue on the agenda? I've had a couple of people that I've interviewed who said that, well, maybe the trick is that we need to frame it differently than we're doing. Because currently we're thinking about antimicrobial resistance as a public health issue. Mm-hmm. And public health is except when there's a huge pandemic like as we just gone through, except those very sort of particular times, in normal circumstances, public health is not a very sexy political topic. But if we say that, if we look at the economic consequences of antimicrobial resistance, i.e., we frame it as an economic issue, that will get the attention of more senior ministers. I interviewed someone in the UK who said that the problem is that ministers of public health are almost in every single country. It is one of the least prestigious ministerial posts in any government. They are considered lightweight. Minister of public health is something where people come in, that's their first ministerial assignment, and then they can move on and become Minister of Interior or Finance or whatever. But the Minister of Public Health, she said, they are really lightweight. They have very little influence within government. But if you frame AMR as an economic issue, and if you can describe the economic consequences of widespread antimicrobial resistance, you will get the attention not just of the Minister of Health, but also the Minister of Finance, and surely also the Prime Minister. So framing how you choose to describe the issue, I think can be extremely important here.
And because the topic is so wider, so multiple, it's easy to address in different ways because it's a public issue, it's a health issue, it's a financial issue.
Yes,
it's very wide actually.
Yeah,
I've read about a lot of examples of governance and those committees, and I've never seen a complex one as this one you just described.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Because
it is. Sorry.
No, it's just that it's very complex. And how the network is huge and involves a high diversity of actors and parties and countries and levels. It's very complex.
Yes, and what makes it all the more interesting to me is that all this action and all these networks operate sort of what the Japanese would call under the water. I mean, we don't see them in the daily media coverage at all. We rarely hear about these campaigns going on. There is an annual National Antibiotic Awareness Day. I think it's sometime in September or October. And that's the only time of year where you can get stories about antibiotic resistance on the news and in the newspaper. So next time there's an Antibiotics Resistance Awareness Day, make sure to sort of take part in that and, check out the stories on TV and in the newspaper, because that's the only time of year where you will actually see something. So there is a lot of action going on, but it's all happening sort of off stage. Yeah.
Professor, I put on the chat as well, so I can be fair, and I have a question for you as well. Is that if any country experience sort of setting up a committee with multiple actors to deliberate about the problem. Like you said, that it's hard sometimes to reach the government, the authorities, but maybe a committee with the governance representative and the pharmaceutical industry and the representative actors. Is there any experience like that?
There are many experiences like that. There are. There's an interesting pattern here, so that countries that have a long tradition of what we would call corporatist governments, where you have organized interests involved in the policy making and also perhaps in the implementation of public policy. Countries that have a long tradition of corporatism tend to have national coordinating committees that brings basically everyone in. So they take their sort of corporatist way of thinking and they apply that to AMR, saying that, well, we use corporatist arrangements to shape economic policy or social policy or all the other policy areas. Let's try that on AMR too. So they will have public servants from all levels of government, but they will also bring in the medical professions. They will bring in, the doctor societies, and there will be a nursing association. The National Veterinarian Association will have a representative on the committee, and so on and so forth. And then you have the other version, which you see more in, say, Central Europe and Southern Europe, where corporatism is not so common. They will have a national sort of coordinating group, but everyone in that group are from within the public sector itself. So they will say, okay, so we have people from 2 or 3 ministries. We have the Institute of Public Health. We have a few local governments. The big cities will be represented, and so on and so forth. There might be, a top medical doctor also, but nothing more. So there's no broader societal representation. In Sweden, I know they have what they call, I think the group is called the Coordinating Mechanism. I mean, what a sexy name for a committee, the Coordinating Mechanism, right? They have something like 35, I think there's something like 35 representatives sitting in that coordinating mechanism. And they are from national government, from regional government, from local government, from the medical profession. All the stakeholders you can possibly think of are represented in that coordinating mechanism. So, and I think there's a similar pattern in Denmark as well, certainly Germany, and so on and so forth. So there are many examples of exactly what you're talking about.
Excellent. I think we are getting towards our end, right, Alejandro?
Yes, yes. I wish to thank you, Patricia, for your comments.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
No, John, for us, it's a very, very good webinar. And thanks a lot, and apologize the delay of today, but
No worries.
But for us, it's a very interesting subject, and that subject wasn't in the public agenda. So it's a great idea that you gave us. John, thanks a lot. And in a few days, I will send you a translation of this webinar.
I'd love to see that. Yeah. I'd love to see that. Thank you all. Thank you for really great questions. And thank you, Alejandro, for organizing this whole event. It's been really, really good fun. And thank you, Patricia, for your lovely comments. They've been really, really helpful.
So
thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks.